Okay, very warm welcome to everybody today to this webinar that we're hosting on dignified access to good food in the City of Wyndham. We're very fortunate to be joined by a terrific lineup of presenters, Dr. Rebecca Lindberg from Deakin University, Ian Fenton and Christine McInnes from Wyndham Park Community Centre, and Brien Baxter from Foodbank Victoria. So I am going to begin, and for those who don't know me, my name is Nick Rose. I'm the Executive Director of Sustain, the Australian Food Network. Like to begin by acknowledging, particularly in the City of Wyndham, that we are on the lands of the Bunurong and Wadawurrung people, and acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land, now known as the City of Wyndham. The Bunurong and Wadawurrung peoples are the first custodians of the lands, waters, seas and skies, and developers of ecological communities on the basalt plains around the Werribee Yallook. We pay respect to their ancestors and elders who always have and always will care for country and community today and for future generations. So the format of today's webinar is, as you see here, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the food systems capacity building project that we've been working on for the City of Wyndham over the last 11 months. Then I will hand over to Beck from Deakin, who's going to share with us her insights and work on this really critical issue of food security. We'll then hear from Brien from the Foodbank Victoria perspective in terms of the challenges and current situation in the City of Wyndham. Then from Ian and Christine on their work locally at Wyndham Park Community Centre. And as we go through all those presentations, I invite you to share your thoughts and questions in the Q&A function, and we'll take all those with our panel for some discussion, hopefully 20 minutes or so at the end. All right, so for those who haven't heard about this work, this is a food systems capacity building project funded by the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation that in this year 2023 is celebrating its 100th year as one of Melbourne and Victoria's leading social justice focused charitable foundations with a particularly strong track record in supporting food security and sustainable food systems. And Sustain has been fortunate to be a beneficiary of that funding for the duration of our 7 years of existence to date. So this particular project's aims, as you can see there, are to develop a model to support community and councils to identify and address key food system challenges, and of course food security being a primary challenge, and secondly to build understanding of food systems issues across the council and to help overcome internal silos. So in terms of what we're seeking to achieve with this work, first of all, the development and delivery of a series of capacity building events and workshops, of which today is the final one. Secondly, to share knowledge and expertise from leading researchers and practitioners, and these are the people who are joining us today. And finally, to develop and present a short film celebrating community leaders, producers, organisations in the City of Wyndham, to deliver a report and to have a celebration at the end of these 12 months. So here's the timeline of this work, commencing back in July 2022, and then with a series of workshops, as you see there, and then today's event is the food security component of this work, and our final event will be in council in Werribee on the 30th of June. So for those who haven't heard about Sustain, as I mentioned, we are a national sustainable and healthy food systems organisation and a health promotion charity incorporated in January 2016, based in Melbourne, but we do work with partners around Australia. Our mission is to design and build better food systems, better for people and better for the planet. So our body of work spans research, policy, engagement, networking, and community food growing, particularly in urban agriculture. So you see here just a very high level overview of our work over the last 7 years. One of the notable pieces of research that we've done relevant to this area is the Pandemic Gardening Survey that was open for 1 month in July 2020, received over 9,000 responses, including over 3,600 from Victorians, and really stands as a powerful testament to the benefits and importance of people having access to green spaces, gardens, whether in their own private spaces or in community settings, both in terms of direct individual and household food security, but also in terms of mental health. We also have a very strong focus on working in policy development and food system and food security strategy, and have worked with many local governments over the last several years in that focus, including, of course, this work we've been doing with the City of Wyndham. And I also just want to mention before handing over to Beck that following on from today's webinar about food security and talking about ways forward and what needs to happen in Victoria and indeed nationally. And for those who don't know, the Australian government right now has an inquiry into food security and the future of food security for Australia. I'll share that link with everybody once we get going. They are still taking submissions, so it's definitely worthwhile letting the people in Canberra know what you think about this. But we're very fortunate to be able to have this event at the end of the month, on the 29th of May, on a really important campaign that has been underway for a couple of years now in the United Kingdom. A rights-based approach to this issue. It's called the Right to Food campaign. And the speakers in that event will be the Member of Parliament for Liverpool West Derby, who is championing that campaign in terms of getting parliamentary and government action on this issue, Ian Byrne, and also one of the key practitioner researchers, Dr. Sharon Noonan-Gunning from City University in London. They'll be joining us to speak about the development of that campaign. So please do join us for that. I'll share the link to register. It's also a free webinar that we are putting on to promote discussion of these issues in Victoria and in Australia. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca Lindberg, a research fellow at Deakin University, who is really one of the leading scholars in this area of food security, and has been for many years, as well as being very embedded in community, and has supported many organisations over the course of her work. And I'll stop sharing my screen so Beck can share hers and share her work with us. Over to you, Beck.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's really wonderful to have so many people attending this presentation, or perhaps listening to it after the fact. And it's not surprising given the current context that we are facing in Australia, and indeed particularly as Victorians who had a really difficult period over the pandemic. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what food insecurity is in the Australian context, and who's at increased risk, and how many people we estimate to be facing it, and what some of the causes and consequences are, and then take quite a high level view at explaining how our government is responding at the national as well as the state level, and also a bit of a descriptor about the not-for-profit sector, although we do have some wonderful speakers that are going to talk to me that have far more expertise in this just after my presentation, which I'll put my timer on now and make sure I stop talking in 20 minutes time. And then third and finally, I want to offer a description of what a right to food informed approach could look like in the Australian context, to offer perhaps a new-ish way of reframing how we address household food security in our country, and particularly at the local government level. So I'll sort of deep dive a little bit more into that at the back end of my talk. So what we know is food insecurity is absolutely on the rise. So about 1.2 million households were expected to be affected by this issue about a decade ago, and that's up close to sort of 12% with more recent estimates. So when we're thinking about food insecurity, there can be levels of severity. And when we measure food security, we're kind of looking at assessing the severity of this issue. So if someone is marginally food insecure, they might be worrying about running out of food or limiting their intake. If they are moderately food insecure, we know they're also doing the marginal tactics, but on top of that, they might be compromising on the quality or quantity of food. And if they're severely food insecure, this is when people are skipping meals or reducing food intake, perhaps even going without food over a day. And there are different ways of measuring food security status. And even over here, some local governments have taken up this issue and are measuring their local citizens' food security, which is so important. But what colleagues and I have done, and this was launched late last year, is we're trying to get everyone on the same page about what's important in measuring household food security status. We know it's increasing, but one of the challenges we have in addressing it is that we have different measures and different groups saying that there are a different amount of people being impacted. So that can be problematic. And if you don't measure it well, you can't address it well. So we want and there's really good progress around this. We are recommending that an 18-item measure, which was first developed in the United States, and now a lot of high-income countries, including the UK, are taking this up. Canada does it as well. There's 18 different questions that households can step through. It just takes a few minutes to administer. And fortunately, the ABS and the next National Health Survey, they are going to use most of this measure. So we should get a much stronger picture about what's happening in households across Australia and what sorts of policy measures and different initiatives that are being implemented, how they are affecting the status of those households, and ideally bringing down both the prevalence and the severity over time. So we do have enough evidence to certainly know which populations are at an increased risk of experiencing household food insecurity, and they include the following populations. So as I said, it's now around 3 million households that are estimated to be impacted by this issue. And I'm largely a qualitative researcher, and I think lived experience of this issue can speak much more to its impact on people's lives than perhaps that figure of 3 million. So I'm going to give you now just a couple of minutes to read some of the excerpts from interviews that I've done over the last few years. And lastly, so what you might have got a sense from with those lived experience excerpts, that food insecurity can manifest in different ways and can have different implications for different individuals or in different settings. And so often, as a way of sort of organising and understanding it, a lot of us in public health and in food security circles, we rely on this definition that comes from the United Nations and is advanced through organisations like the Food and Agriculture Organisation and the World Health Organisation, that sort of describes food security as something that is multi-dimensional. And therefore, initiatives to ensure food security for households, for individuals, for communities, even whole countries, they have to take this multi-dimensional approach when addressing food security. Need to ensure people's access, food availability, the sustainability of the supply, particularly for food security of future generations, stability over time, that people can use food, that they live in settings that has water access and safe food environments, and that people have a say and they have agency about their food system. Now, at the moment, when these things break down, that's when food insecurity occurs. And certainly at the moment, one of the really substantive challenges to ensuring that people have adequate food is the cost of food, and more broadly, the cost of living. So what this data shows, that something like dairy products, for example, are 14.5% more expensive than they were this time last year. This is the CPI data that was just released just a few weeks ago in April. Bread products, breads and cereals, are up at 11.5% more expensive. And across the board, absolutely. And this is at a time as well that there's a rental crisis and a housing crisis and other cost of living pressures. But it's so often food is that discretionary item in people's household budgets. It's the elastic item. It's the item that gets taken care of after all of the other costs of living are addressed, and that's because many of those costs of living are fixed. Your rent is fixed, school fees are fixed, your utility bills, paying off any debt. But so the elasticity comes in that perhaps one week there's $120 to buy food, and the next week there might only be $5. So it is multifactorial, but the economics and income is the greatest predictor of whether or not you are food secure or whether you are not food secure. So we know income is such an important area in determining people's food security status. So what are we doing about this problem in the Australian context? What strategies are in place? And, ideally a comprehensive approach would look like this. It's public policy, community responses, organisational, all the way down to those individual and interpersonal responses. And that's what it's going to take to adequately support those 3 million Australians who are food insecure. Unfortunately, we don't quite have that response to food insecurity in Australia. And one of the things that we do to tackle the underlying causes of food insecurity, which is income poverty, is that we have social security benefits. We have welfare measures in place. But what this data shows, even though it is a little dated, if you want to follow along with me, this fixed hard line here is the poverty line for a two-person household. And you can see here in the red that around 2011, pensioners, if there were 2 of them in a household, just went above the poverty line. And that same goes again for single pensioners. So for about a decade, ideally, this community has been living with just enough to ensure that they had an adequate standard of living. Those, however, who are on job seeker payments or then New Start, had hundreds of dollars, or if not thousands of dollars in deficit between what they needed to meet an adequate standard of living and what our social security measures provided. And this plays out as well in disability support, in Oz study and AB study, in single parent allowance. So we know that people, to make up that stopgap in what our welfare measures make available to them, and other low incomes as well, people who are employed can experience food insecurity, absolutely. Those that are in gig economies, those that are in low paid workplaces or insecure work environments. What people do to make up that shortfall is that they require food charity, some of them, about a third of them, and they use a whole host of other different strategies to just to cope and make ends meet. Another part of the sort of policy picture at the moment is that, as Nick said, we do have an inquiry. It started late last year into food security in Australia. We are making some progress on remote First Nations food security status, and at a state government level, we had a recently appointed food relief task force that came about as a consequence of the pandemic. And since about 2016, Department of Education has worked with Foodbank to supply breakfasts, and I believe lunch programs have recently been supported as well. So we are seeing some evidence of national and state governments certainly taking an interest and noticing that food insecurity is occurring, but there is so much more that needs to be done, and so much is falling to the food charity sector. Much of it is supplied rescued food that that is fit for human consumption, but not able to be sold. It is redistributed by frontline community organisations, often faith-based charities that do parcels and meals and soup kitchens and outreach and community cook-ups and all sorts of school programs, all sorts of different ways of offering free and subsidised food to people that seek it out. They often operate independently, and that means that there's a variety of entitlement or requirements to access these services. So those frontline services over here are often at least partly supplied in their food by these agencies over here. And this sector has really grown phenomenally over the last decade. If you can follow along in the green here, that's a combination of the size in tonnes of the sector. So from 2008-9 up to my most recent data point, which is 2016-17, the sector has more than doubled in size, so about over a decade. And the emergency food sector, they'll be the first to tell you that they are feeling overwhelmed, that the demand is spiking, that they are not able to keep up, absolutely, right now, but even prior to right now as well. Food insecurity there's been a light shone on it, absolutely, because of the pandemic and cost of living pressures, but it certainly predates those issues. It means that it's reached more communities than ever before. And this is just some work from a colleague and I, where we really mapped across the state of Victoria what's known about the prevalence and severity of food insecurity. So the darker colours are where there is more food insecurity, and the reds are where there's emergency food relief organisations. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is these agencies aren't necessarily established where there is no need. They're established for a whole host of reasons, and often it's about where there's volunteers or a not-for-profit organisation that's able to offer a service like this. So emergency food alone cannot solve food insecurity. Food not-for-profits can do amazing things when they focus on dignity, choice, nutrition, and are community-led. However, they are limited in their capacity. There is often too much nutrient-dense, ultra-processed foods offered in this setting, and not enough dairy, protein, vegetables, and fruits. They have finite operational resources, often relying on volunteers, donations, and fundraising. And, when I talk to community members that access emergency food, and I have done many hundreds of these interviews over my decade or so working on researching food insecurity, people tell me that typically they do not want to be in these settings. They don't find them dignified, socially acceptable, or adequate. So, is there an alternative to the current status quo? I started thinking about this about 4 or 5 years ago, around the time that an organisation called the Right to Food Coalition started to get organised and bring people together around this issue. And I started to read a lot more about human rights informed approaches. And this is really one of the seminal texts from that time in my life, and one of the leading kind of thinkers in this area, who posits that a right to food is an alternative to addressing household food security with charity and benevolent approaches. He does also concede that in many high-income countries, places like Australia, the right to food is sort of thought about as, you know, something about global hunger. It's not domestically what we need to be concerned with. And so, you know, I started to unpack this with many other scholars as well, to try and think about, well, what might a human right to food approach look like in our domestic setting in Australia? So I've read some of the key thinkers, and particularly leaned on a lot of the international literature and evidence about this. And someone like Olivier de Schutter, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, he's done a lot of writing about this, and he visited Canada back in 2012. So that's a high-income country, very similar to Australia, and his assessment about what would advance the right to food in that setting gives, I think, a lot of insights about what we could do here in Australia. His advice was that they needed a national food strategy that brought together all levels of government to address the right to food for all, focus on rebuilding local food systems, support for children's programs, and that absolutely needed to be underpinned by law. Social assistance levels were inadequate to ensure that everyone could enjoy the human right to an adequate standard of living, which includes an adequate standard of food. And same goes for minimum wages in the Canadian context. He also acknowledges, and these are just some of his key recommendations, not all of them, absolutely, that there's a really need for Indigenous peoples to have access to their lands and water and food sovereignty. So his work and that of other United Nations Special Rapporteurs, things like the voluntary guidelines on the right to food, they give us some strong sense of the type of levers that we could be pulling in Australia. And so taking that evidence base and reading widely in this setting, I worked with some colleagues to go out to public health leaders and food security leaders in the Australian context. We interviewed 30 of them, and we asked them, well, you know, what role might a human rights-based approach, what could it look like in the Australian context, and what are the roles and responsibilities of different actors across the system to advance the human right to food for all? And so these key informants that we interviewed, it was at the back of the bushfires and at the start of the pandemic. It was a really heady time, but these really experienced 10 plus years, all of these leaders that we interviewed, this is what they told us: that it is absolutely governments, both elected and the public servants, the workforce within governments and at all levels, that we look to ensure the right to food. There are, of course, important roles for other players in this setting as well, but the buck stops with government if you choose a human right to food informed approach. But not-for-profit sector, food industry, the tertiary sector, legal professionals, and of course citizens and public health practitioners. There's a range of roles that need to be played and fulfilled. And so, you know, in conclusion of this, just giving you a little taste of this work, I was trying to decide, okay, well, should we use human rights framing? Should we use the principles and processes that are aligned in human rights to food? And the reasons to do it, in synthesis, is that there are states and territories that do have human rights charters and legislations, and perhaps even local government settings that do as well. It also means that if you link your food security work and describe it as in a human rights informed approach, you can link it to these broader international agendas like sustainable development goals. It can also help bring in other parties and players, like those that work in the right to health, the rights of the child, and the rights of First Nations people. And to some extent, although it's a very old way of thinking about food security, because of course the Human Rights Declarations came out post-World War II, in other ways, it's new-ish. It is a new way of describing food as a right. And when food insecurity is occurring, that is a violation of law. And I think there is growing momentum in Australia for this. And I'll flag just in finishing up a few examples of, of how it is being taken forward in a number of circumstances. And it does sort of focus much more on the systems that cause food insecurity rather than focusing on individuals and blaming victims. There are some challenges in taking up that human rights informed approach. I acknowledge that it can be seen as lefty or academic and utopian, that there might be other ways to frame this issue in political or in the broader public to gain better traction. And that, without domestic legislation, like a national charter of human rights that includes the human right to food, we might expect that there's some limited value, although I think there's really principles and processes that nonetheless can still be taken and informed from that approach. And that, not many of us are trained in human rights necessarily, and sometimes it can be a little bit legalistic as well, working in this space. So I think there needs to be some capacity building and training and just some socializing of this idea as well. So that's my timer telling me to stop talking, which I plan to do very soon. I'm just summarizing here a little bit about, what I see a human rights informed approach looking like. So just in my last minute or two, I just wanted to say, as I said, that, there are those that are taking up this human rights framing and an example, and Nick, and there's likely several people who are on this seminar right now that were involved in this initiative as well. Across the food sector over the last few years, a range of different professionals and organisations came together with all different levels of expertise, working at all different elements of the food system, to identify via consensus 10 key leverage points towards a healthy, regenerative and equitable food system for our state. And the first leverage point was about a right to food law, and about the legal, having that legal as well as that policy mandate at the state level as well as at the local government level to advance, the right to food for all. Here's another example of taking a human rights informed approach, because it's really working across the system and looking at different actors. And this is an oldie but a goodie that came out of the Heart Foundation back in 2015 that explains the range of different ways that local government can be working on food security. And as I said, there's a lot of evidence that this is also a human rights informed approach, because it's working at those different dimensions that the UN defines as key to food security. It does do community consultation as well, and it's working with a range of different actors. And just finally, and this is actually picking up some of Nick's work and Amy Carrad's work, where they've looked at, in New South Wales and Victoria, different councils that are taking up the mandate to advance both equitable as well as sustainable and healthy food systems work. And they highlight here some of the areas that are going really well in taking up that mantle, and some areas where local governments, could be doing more, or developing action plans around, or resourcing. So again, this is a sort of a human rights informed approach, because it's looking for those synergistic policy opportunities and advancing a whole range of rights simultaneously with this type of work. So I'm just going to leave this slide up as my final kind of take-home message and my synthesis about what I think communities can be doing in local settings to address food security, and hand back over to you, Nick. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Beck, for that really comprehensive and wonderful overview of, so many years and hours, days, weeks, months, years of work that you and colleagues have been doing in this area. It really is quite an achievement, and so important in building the case for much stronger action, particularly at state and federal levels, as you identified, in terms of responsibility to really start tackling the root causes of the entrenched and growing issue of food insecurity and food poverty in our communities, in our state, in our country. So Yes, if people have questions, please use the Q&A function and we'll pick those up towards the end. Now I'm going to just briefly go back to my my slides and introduce Brien Baxter, Regional Manager for Foodbank Victoria, who's agreed to be with us today to share some of the perspective of Foodbank Victoria in terms of the challenges related to food insecurity in the City of Wyndham, and also some of the great work that Foodbank Victoria is doing to support frontline agencies in responding to it. So I'll stop sharing. Brien, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Geez, there was a lot of discussion could be generated out of Becca's presentation. We'll be very brief, but just want to give a quick overview of our moves in Foodbank Victoria to create really dignified ways of access to food in community where we can get fresh to community, and also a little bit of what we're doing in Wyndham. So we've just got a very short slideshow, which we'll start in a second. It won't let us share it at the moment. Maybe it will. Can you go to the next slide so I can see it? Can you see that presentation at the moment? Because it's
yeah, we're seeing the presentation. It's just not in full screen.
Okay, so we'll try and do that. It changed for some reason on us. It's not doing anything for us.
It's okay, Brien. Just go ahead. It's fine.
Just go to the next one. Yeah. There we go. There we go. Okay, cool. Thanks for that. Okay, so we're part of our strategic plan is our neighbourhood assessments across the 79 LGAs. It's a 4-year plan and task for us. It's around getting on the ground, having a look at everything that's influencing food insecurity, but also looking at the ways that we can improve how we distribute food and work with our current and newly identified partners to look at different methods of getting food out and increasing their capacity to move food out. The data we're using is looking at around trying to get at least 35 kilograms of healthy food to each food insecure person in an LGA. As you can imagine, over Victoria, those LGAs vary in the amount of food that's coming in or is available, not only through Foodbank, but through all the other food charity partners and through local growers. Part of our strategy was to develop a healthy food basket, which is not a new term, but it gives us a guide into the type of food that we want to source and that we're able to source, and to gradually move out the less healthier food, but maintaining that volume of food that we can distribute across the state. That has grown organically over COVID. I think we're looking at around 13 million kilograms of food being distributed out of the Charitable warehouse. That has grown by about 1.5 to 2 million kilograms over COVID, with a really large increase in cold, fresh and frozen food. In Wyndham, just in Wyndham alone, we've got 49 partners, 36 schools and 13 agencies. You can see that we've delivered over 400,000 kilograms year to date into that LGA. And that's a slight growth on what we've done in the previous financial year. With the school breakfast program is a really important program with 30 items, all green or traffic light green rated, that schools can order. And we're finding that every school we visit orders more food post our visit, and that they are distributing a lot of that food to families directly from school, even though it's lunch and breakfast. It's not necessarily full meals, but there's a substantial amount of fresh that they can order in carrots, mini carrots, apples, oranges and pears, and they can order unlimited product. So that's actually seen a growth in some food getting into a lot of our LGAs. One of the programs we're really proud of is our Farms to Family program. The small picture at the top shows a small truck that delivers around 2,500 kilograms into a community, and you can see the community can just choose what they want out of. There's 4 bins on either side, and there's 8 product. That is very popular. And the larger picture at the bottom is our mobile bus markets, which we're also running in Wyndham area. 150 families can go through that bus, and it holds cold, fresh, frozen, and dry goods, ambient dry goods. That is a very popular way to shop. People enjoy coming, and at times we have up to 300 families come to any one of our markets. This is just a snapshot of data we started in all of our LGAs. It was pretty broad. It's got a lot of demographics on it as well. The main issue, food out per person in the top left, is how many kilograms per person we were distributing at the start of the financial year in the Wyndham LGA. And now you can see that that's increased to 31.9. It mentions the food insecure population being 5%. And our goal of 35 kilograms is based on the amount of people this data represented pre-COVID, so that we know there are more people that are now experience food insecurity. We meet them at markets that have never experienced this before. The 35 kilograms, it takes into account that there are other providers in the space providing food. So currently we've got a 43,000 kilogram gap deficit in our food just into Wyndham. The barriers for us, or the difficulties for us, are the organisations that we're currently working with have limitations, resource limitations, space, the ability to collect, receive and distribute fresh, which is really important, but they're limited by their own resources. So part of our, I suppose part of our work that we're trying to do is actually work out how we can improve that. If it's greater access to fresh through more frequency or delivery, there's a whole range of things. Also, outside of Wyndham, when we look rurally as well, there's often food that is available grown by local growers, but the local organisations don't have capacity to receive it and distribute it. We collect it where we can and redistribute it in space, but that's food miles. We would really prefer if we could keep local. I'll just stop sharing that if I can. Yeah, so there's a whole lot of questions, a whole lot of discussion that I would love to jump in with Rebecca with, but that's just an overview of how we're going at the moment, what we're doing across the state. We're making some really good inroads into even just discussing distribution models with our existing charity partner base, and also that we have schools that are interested in feeding families. That's quite a safe space for families to come to, but quite difficult for them to manage other foods other than the school breakfast program.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Brien. Really great to get that that detailed picture on what's happening in the Wyndham area, and to hear about the work that Foodbank is doing to support frontline agencies to address it. So now our third two speakers, actually, Ian Fenton and Christine McInnes, respectively, the manager and community worker at the Wyndham Park Community Centre, are going to be sharing with us a little bit about the community that they are working with and supporting, and the experiences they're having, and their perspective on this issue going forward. So I'll stop sharing, Ian and Christine, and hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Nick. Thank you so much for such fantastic presentations, Brien and Rebecca. I mean, just a huge amount of information, and I think everyone's commenting in the chat. It's a lot of food for thought for all of us. We're here from Wyndham Park Community Centre. We're on Bunurong lands, and we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where Wyndham Park Community Centre operates and serves our local community. And we're on the front line, I guess, of providing food relief in Wyndham, and have been since the start of the pandemic, just over 3 years ago. And I think we've learnt a lot over that period, and I asked Christine to join me here today because she's been there throughout that and done a huge amount of work, and has provided food relief to our immediate community, to families across Wyndham, and what we're seeing now as well is a lot of refugees, people coming into our area, or people who arrived in Wyndham, and we've seen Afghan refugees coming through, and most recently, we're also seeing some Ukrainian refugees coming through as well. And I think, a lot of what Beck, and especially in those slides there about the realities of what it's like for the community sector providing food relief, that's exactly some of the things that we're trying to do as well as we can. So I'll just start off, share a few photos of what we do and where we do it from. And then I think Christine will just talk a little bit about how our food relief operates and what she's seeing on the front lines there. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I guess, a neighbourhood house perspective to this issue, food security and food relief, and what are some of the barriers or the questions that we're asking in the sector of what we can do. So I'll just share a couple of pictures. So this is us, we're Wyndham Park Community Centre, and that's our beautiful logo. And this is Christine, just setting up a little bit of food relief with one of our fantastic volunteers, Alistair. Alistair is at Foodbank in Yarraville every Wednesday morning, picking up food in our 25-year-old ute. And we have a huge team of volunteers who are just so reliable and so incredible, who make our food relief happen our community store happen every single Thursday. And these are the lines that we have out the front of our centre. And we can see Joel there with the computer. We register everyone's name and how many members of family they are picking up food for. We don't ask for anything. We don't ask for any concession cards or anything like that. Originally, we provided food relief to anyone who resided in the LGA of Wyndham, and we've had to reduce that now to just the two suburbs that we serve primarily and where we're located, which is Werribee and Hoppers Crossing is really our sort of where our demographic is. And we've recently also been doing a little bit of pop-up food relief in other centres, and I've had a lot of people accessing through that as well as doing a little bit of it at our centre here, where we've set up and done food relief in a pop-up way at local schools out front of our centre, and in other community centres in Wyndham, such as Penrose Promenade and at Manor Lakes. This is one who Christine was just mentioning earlier to Brien and to Nick. One is a Karen lady who speaks Karen and Burmese, and probably around 50 to 60% at least of the people who access food relief from our centre their families are originally from Myanmar. And they represent, in those localities in Werribee and Hoppers Crossing, Karen families from Myanmar represent about 4% of the population. And so families who are accessing a lot of barriers in everyday life beyond just food relief, but a lot of financial challenges as well, is what we see every day at our centre. And we also run a community shed and have a couple of community gardens around our centre. So I'm just throwing these photos in there as well. And I'll talk to these a little bit later on as well. But we're, I guess, trying to convert what we do in food relief every day into something more sustainable, into something which involves community. And, as Beck said, emergency food relief can't really solve this problem. We need to kind of explore every avenue and every opportunity, every 1% gain as something that we can do to help provide food security. So that was that. And I'll just stop share there. I wanted to talk to that in a second. But I'll just pass it over to Christine for a little bit and she can share a little bit of what day-to-day looks like.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, so I'm the coordinator at the food store here, and we lay it out as a food store so people can shop. So part of that is it enables them to feel more dignified, that they're just shopping in general, but also hopefully they're just taking what they need, because both sides of the coin, like a lot of Australians wouldn't necessarily cook with, say, lentils, whereas people from other cultures wouldn't know what to do with a tin of baked beans. So if you're giving them a hamper, it will have all those things in, and some of the food could be wasted. So we run a community store, and people bring their own shopping bags, and as you saw from the photos, the line stretches right around the building, but it's a bit of a social thing as well. People come every week, and they chat away, and the majority of people feel very welcome here. There are newer people that we're now seeing that are very embarrassed to be coming here, and we try our best to put their minds at rest. We start off, my week starts on a Tuesday where I do my order for Foodbank, and thank you very much, Brien, we really appreciate it. And it's always good to see the things that we can get for free, because we are a not-for-profit, and we really struggle to look for new grants that we can then sustain our food programme. It's always a challenge, and we're always very grateful for people that are in the community that donate on a regular basis. And so on a Tuesday, I do the ordering. We also support Baxter, and they take 18 food parcels and some cooked meals from us. So we have to pack those boxes with our volunteers. Then Wednesday, we pack more boxes for homeless and Werribee Mercy Mental Health, and so different agencies that come to our centre, that it wouldn't be possible for them to come on Thursday, which is our main day for food relief, as it would be just too much for them to come. So that's on a Wednesday. These boxes are packed by our volunteers, and we also then lay out our store. We start off with all the frozen foods and dairy, milk. We're always grateful for anything fresh that comes in. Then we go on to our staples. Then they go the other side of the room, and it's all the fresh fruit and vegetables. And then they finish off with the bread. And so we're very grateful to Coles give us bread, Nando's give us chickens, and anywhere else we can source food. I'm always listening out for a new opportunity for us, but it is a struggle, and yes, it's a struggle, and the people are increasing in numbers that are coming to us, and as a few of you have mentioned, they're not just people that are going to Centrelink or somewhere like that. The people where both partners are working, but there's just not enough money. They're just on the minimum wage, and they can't pay for their rent and put food on the table. And there's many of them are actually, as again was mentioned, skipping meals to make their ends meet. So then Thursday we have our food relief, and today we had 160 people come through the door, and on average they go out with 3 generous carrier bags full of food, and they're very happy and very grateful, and I'm also very happy and very grateful to see them. That's it.
Thanks, Christine, so much for that. Yeah, I mean, I've been the manager at Wyndham Park for a year now, and as I mentioned, we've been doing food relief for just over 3 years now. And Christine started with us as a volunteer, and to help run this program, I mean, we have had support from Wyndham City Council. We've delivered Wyndham City Council's food relief program, and they've supported us with infrastructure. We have also received funding from state government through the priority response for multicultural communities and through pop-up food relief. And it is a real challenge for us to be doing this. And I think as a neighbourhood house and a community centre, there are a lot of people in the sector who say, well, you know, is this the role of neighbourhood houses and community centres to be doing this work? And I think that's a reasonable question to ask, because if we're occupied providing food relief, we might be asking ourselves, where's the space for community development? Where's the space for those capacity building activities that can help families to address their own needs? Where's that focus on people's assets, people's own abilities that can help them to work through this? And so we cut out a huge amount of work for ourselves, I think, because we are providing a community service in the food relief which we provide, and we're also trying to drive that work into other areas of social connection, other areas in terms of capacity building. And what I mean by that is providing food relief to families, but then also delivering community lunches. And then with food waste, working out ways that we can manage that. We've been able to partner with Open Table recently, who are based in Coburg, and they've actually set up a big biodigester in the back of our community shed. So now we're trying to manage our own organic waste and also reduce our carbon footprint by cooking with the methane generated from that system. We're trying to we've set up worm farms and received some small grant support to buy worm farms, so we can be producing really great soil and grow more food out of that. But we're a tiny space, and we're a council facility. I mean, we don't really have the money to invest in a lot of the infrastructure. We're trying to, I guess, fund what works within our capacities as a centre. And when I say our capacities, I'm already talking about, I'm already talking about a staff of 6 or 7 people plus about 30 to 40 volunteers on a weekly basis who we're providing for. So we're stretched to the margins, and that's how we want to be, because I think, we love to deliver efficiency for what we receive, and I think we do a great job of it. But it's a really big conversation for us about what our role is in this and what support is available to not just us, but I speak, also about other community centres in Wyndham and across Victoria, other neighbourhood houses who are trying to do work into this area while also delivering in other spaces where we've traditionally existed as well. And I think there's a great overlap. People do come together around food, and we are so proud to be providing support to refugees and pooled communities, and Wyndham is, about 50% of Wyndham speaks a language other than English at home. So we're incredibly proud to be working in that space, and we want to keep on working in food and sustainability. So we're really enjoying the presentation here today, and happy to answer any questions about being on the front lines and what we aim to do.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ian and Christine. And congratulations on all the work you and your team are doing at Wyndham Park Community Centre. And there's a number of comments and feedback in the chat about just how important that is and how valued it is by members of the Wyndham community who who really value and need that support. So thank you, and thank you also to Brien and Beck for your fantastic presentations as well. There have been a number of questions, and thanks, Beck, for answering those as we've been going. I think everybody's able to see those. If you look at the questions and answer, you can see the questions that have been put, and Beck has put in some responses to them. If Brien or Ian or Christine wants to add anything to any of those responses, I'm just thinking, Ian, and Christine, the one about cultural and religiously appropriate foods for members of those communities. I think you did speak to that, and Christine did as well, but I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to say about that, whether you feel that you have enough access to those kinds of foods, or
do you want to take that one, Christine?
Yes, we would like access to more. I always want more. It's never enough, but it is nice to be able to offer culturally appropriate, relevant food, but because there's a shortage, it's just accessing it. But we do offer lentils, different spices we have come in that people are grateful for, oats and rice, all sorts of things, all different types of lentils and pulses, and yeah, so we try our best to offer as broad a range as we can, but it's just accessing it, really.
I think, like, I mean, that question is so multidimensional. I mean, we've been running some workshops recently about flourishing, which is a real community development sort of idea around flourishing in place and how a community flourishes with members of the Karen community. And some of the voices that have come out in there is they talk about, you know, what they envision flourishing. They talk about working in rice fields and having the capacity to grow your own rice, and that connection to food, which is a really hard thing to deliver when rice now comes in a really clean packet and it's perfect and edible and fantastic. But there is something about that which is missing, where we're trying to build capacity. And if I can just touch on, I mean, we have a few Karen volunteers that help us out with our community garden. They grow as many leafy vegetables as they can for themselves and their community, and they give back to people who are around our centre all the time. They also, you know, they source rabbit from rural areas where they have family and friends, and they make curried rabbit. And I think, you know, while, like Christine says, it's really hard and challenging, and you're always trying to provide more and more culturally relevant food, making food culturally relevant isn't just about the ingredients, it's about the process and the connection that people have to it. So that's one of the areas that, you know, we're trying to work on, I think, as a community development organisation in our little part of the world as well.
Fantastic, yes, and I had the great privilege of going to Werribee Park Mansion Gardens and seeing the great the work that's being done there at the community gardens with the Karen. Yeah, just a fantastic range of culturally diverse food, and really terrific to see. And Sustain has had the privilege of being able to support the United African Farm, which is a community-led organisation working on the other side of Melbourne in Cardinia Shire Council, and they've got a really great initiative going over the last couple of years, a land sharing arrangement with a local farmer in Cardinia who's provided a peppercorn rent for 3 acres of land for them to grow culturally appropriate crops. And in fact, they received a food hub grant from Vic Health to set up the Ubuntu Food Hub. So it's great to see these kind of community-led initiatives you know, starting to emerge in different parts of our city and our state. I'm just looking, there's a question about the best referral pathways and responses for clients needing immediate access to food relief in Wyndham. So Christine is responding to that. Ian, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
I think it's an area that needs work, Nick, as well. Like, to be honest, I think people don't know what's available, and they don't know who to ask for what is available. There's no simple solution to it. Christine would agree with me. I mean, I don't answer the phone that much, but when I do, it is often people looking for food vouchers and things. We don't provide food vouchers. Or, you know, asking us what's available and where. And so we try and have those lists on hand and do the best that we can to make sure that people know what days food relief is available in their areas. Frances Trifletti is with us, and she's a community connector with Wyndham City Council, and so people turn to the community connectors as well. So, but it's sometimes the ecosystem of getting that information is really messy and constantly changing. So it's a space that needs work, I think.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah,
sorry,
go,
could I just
go,
jump in as well? I was just responding and saying about the community connectors through Wyndham City Council. They have a list of where all the food relief programs are within Wyndham, but also all the agencies tend to work together, and so we know what's on offer. Like as Ian said, we don't do vouchers or petrol vouchers or food vouchers or anything, but we know that Wyndham or the Salvation Army, they do them. So we can, depending what problems people come in, they either ring up or they come in personally, we can field them on to other agencies. But the best place is to go to the community connectors at Wyndham City Council. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Christine. So we did have a question also from Jennifer Camp, who asked if food relief was taken over by someone else, would the neighbourhood houses be able to help build capacity in other areas such as cooking workshops, etc.? Beck or Ian, Christine, Brien, are you able to share any information on the cooking workshops, that kind of capacity building?
We have,
we have,
I think it's around 100 pilot schools in the School Breakfast Club cooking program that was online over COVID. But we have two groups of, or two teams that go out in vans with cooking equipment and teach cooking at the school with families. It's very, very popular, but it's a pilot. I'm not sure about the longevity or the length of the pilot. I could just add too that Foodbank's website now has Find Food as a tab. So anybody can go to the Find Food tab and look for organisations that have registered to support people with food. We're consistently updating that and asking our partners to go on and update it as well. Update their own information.
Thank you. Christine, you were going to...
Yes, I was just going to add about the cooking workshops. We have partnered with Oz Harvest and the Salvos, and they have both run cooking workshops here. And I myself have run some, and we have some in the pipeline. So we do our food relief, but we also do cooking workshops. But I would like to say that there's not always a great uptake by people. They seem to think, you know, you offer it for free and you say it's no waste in the kitchen or reusing leftovers, things like that. But people just don't seem to want to come to them. And I don't know what the answer is, how to engage people to want to, food lunch boxes for, especially for refugees that are new in this country. They have no idea how to pack a lunchbox for their children. And we offered classes in that, and there just wasn't the uptake for it. So I don't know how to engage the community.
Beck, I wonder if you, in your work and research and conversations with people, if you've got any thoughts about that one, because that's certainly something that's been suggested in the UK on their Right to Food campaign. You know, a mass expansion of, you know, community kitchens. I'm not sure if that means workshops, but or just making that facility available to people. Have you had any thoughts or done any work on that?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I really agree with Ian's point that food is a wonderful connector. And I take your point too, Christine, that particularly for those that are newly arrived, building that those cultural competencies around our food system and food norms, and, you know, how to shop at a supermarket and, you know, deal with a whole new food environment, and not just gravitate to the familiar, the big multinational companies that you had in your home country, like Macca's, you know. So I think there's definitely a space. And And then I guess more the researcher in me understands that communities that are food insecure are actually no less literate, not that that's what you're suggesting otherwise, but they're no less literate in these food skills than any other demographic. So an overemphasis on needing food skills and competencies as the solve to food insecurity is not it. And sort of focusing on those individualized responsibilities instead of those system drivers as a good use of time and energy, that can be distracting. So I guess I've got a few thoughts, and perhaps even you might say that they're competing thoughts on that. But I'm keen to dial into that UK session. I mean, they're a bit further ahead than us in having done some thinking about it. And I think there's quite an emphasis on school meals too, which might not quite translate in our context as well. So I guess I'd say that I'll be watching and waiting the evidence and to see how the kind of practice and policy space evolves around that too.
Yeah, I mean, just following up on that, Beck, with school meals. I mean, we've never really had that in Australia, but what do you think about that as a kind of like a foundation for, a healthy start in life, and making sure that, at the very least, kids get a good, solid, nutritious meal when they go to school?
Yeah, I've done a bit of work with the charity Eat Up Australia that does free meals. So done some work with teachers and other welfare officers to look at food insecurity in the schools where they're providing food. So certainly it's occurring in schools. Kids are not entirely protected from food insecurity. We know parents go to great lengths and carers go to great lengths to protect their children from it, but it does still manifest. So yeah, on the one hand, and they seem to be having a bit of a policy moment. We had our state opposition leader promise to do a statewide rollout or a much greater expanded version of school meals in Victoria. And so I guess if it's going to happen, I want it to be focused on nutrition and culturally appropriate and the dietary requirements. Use it as an opportunity to promote our Australian dietary guidelines as well as achieve sustainability goals. There's some incredible examples of locally sourced and farm to plate, and if we're going to do it, let's do it really, really well and get those synergistic outcomes around the environment, health and equity, and universal. They need to be for every kid, because otherwise stigma will occur and does occur. If they don't get up, or if someone were to ask me what's your best bet for a sort of national approach to addressing food insecurity, that wouldn't be my first bet. And unsurprisingly, given my presentation, it's going to be around sort of income support and ensuring the adequacy of that for those households that need emergency food to help make ends meet.
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And the UK campaign is that's one component, but they're very focused, obviously, as well on the income question. All right. Well, I'm conscious that we're probably at about our time. I know people have to get off to other meetings and work and so on in the afternoon. I think we've dealt with all the questions. If people do want to follow up, please, I'll put my email in the chat as well. Everybody who's registered has got our email, and if you've got particular follow-up questions for particular organisations or speakers, please send them through to me. This webinar has been recorded, and we will be sharing that with everyone. And as I mentioned, if you are interested in finding out more about the campaign side of things and advocacy and what's happening over in the UK with this Right to Food campaign, which I think looks really interesting, not least because they've done something I don't think we have done really in Australia, which is really create a broad base of support for these issues. And it actually, interestingly, came from sports, as I understand it, from football. Fans supporting food banks, I think, was the grassroots organisation and campaign that is, from the Liverpool and Everton football clubs in the UK. That's where this push for the right to food has come from, and now it's spread out with local government, with a number of councils across the UK declaring themselves as right to food cities, as well as trade unions getting behind it, and many others. And I think that's where this needs to get to, I guess, if we want to really, mainstream this issue and get serious action and resourcing into it, it needs to, be widely understood and shared across the whole of the community, because it does affect us all, and it's an indictment on our country. I think a country as rich as Australia, that we've got this situation where so many people are not able to access good food in affordable and dignified ways, which is really what we should be aiming for, and that's what the human right to food is about. So just invite any of the other panelists who joined us today, whether you want to have any sort of closing comments before we wrap things up and say farewell.
Nick, can I just want to share one piece of data with you on behalf of Christine and Ian, which highlights the growth in demand and the pressures on the organisations assisting relief food. Last financial year, their organisation distributed 29,000 kilograms of Foodbank food. And so far this financial year, they've distributed 59,000 kilos so far this financial year. So that's a massive increase. It's an increase in demand on their resources, and we're going to come visit them one day, have a meet and greet and see how they're going.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Thanks, Brien, for sharing that.
Thanks, Brien. I think, Nick, we've really enjoyed being here, and I think from our perspective, it's great to hear what Brien and Beck have to say. I mean, there's so much discussion, which I think, I guess I mentioned, sometimes we're busy with the logistics, but putting deeper thought into this about what's going to make a difference in the long term and what our advocacy role is on the ground as well is really important. So we've really appreciated being able to present here and have people here and listen to what we're about. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Ian. And Christine?
Nothing more to add, really. Just thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to Brien and Beck for their insights as well. It's been a great chat.
Thanks, Christine, and thank you. Yeah, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us and share your wonderful work. And it's been a privilege to hear it. Thank you. Beck, last word to you.
Just what Christine said, thanks all. It's a big challenge. We've got to keep the conversation up, and thanks to Nick and his team for giving us this platform, and wonderful to hear that, Wyndham is a city council that's really interested in advancing in this area. Thanks.
Thanks, Beck, and congratulations again on everything that you do, because it's really so important to provide that big picture as you've done today, and for your generosity in sharing it with us all. All right, and thank you to everybody who's attended. There's a wealth of expertise and experience in the attendees, many of whom I know and who are doing fantastic work in this sector. So very much look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Please do come along on the 29th, and with the next stages of the Wyndham project. Just to finish off, just to say that we will be coming together at the end of June. So if you are interested in joining that and being part of that celebration of this year of food systems capacity building, please let us know, and the details will be provided. It'll be at council offices in Werribee. There's been a lot of interest stimulated amongst staff in the City of Wyndham, many of whom attended today. A really terrific core group of staff: Janelle, Elio, Hayley, Carolina, Jenny, and others who have been accompanying this process and are keen to continue it, and really build engagement and momentum within council, which is fantastic. And just wanted to flag as well that one of the things that's come out of this project is the The question of Werribee South Market Gardens is one of the state's, prime food bowls. We heard that, the producers do donate fresh produce to Wyndham Park. Those producers do a fantastic job and produce an extraordinary amount of fresh produce on a tiny percentage of the state's land, and the future is up for question. So, long-term security for what is happening there is a really important part of this whole discussion as well. Okay, all right. Well, that's it from us. I'm going to stop recording now, and thank you everybody for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.